So first of all, welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. This is a Zoom webinar. So when you joined, you'll find that your camera and microphone are automatically switched off. Later on in the process, if you want to join in and be seen and be heard, we can manage that. But part of the reason for that is that we are recording this session, so it's all anonymous, and the recording has already started. So if you want to check back on any of this later on, you can check out the video on our YouTube channel. So yes, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. My name's Bruce Rowling, and with my colleague Mark Erskine, we are the co-partners of Applied Strengths, which has the unique privilege of being the sole agents for life orientations in the UK. Hani from Life Orientations is one of our guests this afternoon, so you'll be possibly hearing from him today, but almost certainly be hearing from him later on in the series if you join us for the sales webinar, which will be taking place live from Japan. Mark will introduce himself a little bit later on, but just a little bit of background to this series of webinars. Mark and I spend a lot of time talking about various aspects of consultancy in leadership change, organizational development, sales, facilitation. And we frequently talk about the rapidly changing environment, both in terms of the post-pandemic environment that we're in, but other things that are creeping in more and more, things like artificial intelligence. How does that affect how we operate as consultants? And we decided at the end of last year that it would be a nice idea to invite some of the people that we work with, who you'll be meeting during the course of these webinars, and inviting them to share their views and develop a bit of a debate about how things have changed, whether they've changed, and to what extent they have, our views about the future, and the role that things like behavior, because obviously that's our key interest in this, affect how we operate and how people are developing as leaders, managers, and contributors to various aspects of business. So that's the background. Today is an introductory session where we'll be inviting people to talk about their thoughts generally about the consultancy environment, but there will be further webinars in this series. The next one, from my memory, is leadership. We have leadership, sales, change, and organizational development, and we'll be inviting speakers who are experts in those areas to share their views on those specific aspects of consultancy today. The format for today is that we will invite our speakers to make a short elevator pitch. They'll give you their thoughts. There are 4 of them. They'll go one after the other, and they've been asked to address this question: how do we make human connections in a virtual world? Those of you who've been following any of this on LinkedIn will see that we've already had some very nice reactions to this question, so it's obviously stimulated a bit of thought and debate. So I think probably without any further ado, I'll hand over to Mark, who will introduce our first speaker. Just a reminder, now that the chat is working, if you've got any questions as we go through, would you please post your questions in the chat column, and when we come to the question and answer session, we'll pick them up. Thanks. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Bruce. Welcome, everybody. So my name's Mark Erskine. So Bruce and I are joint partners in the business for Applied Strengths, and as Bruce has mentioned, our primary offer is life orientations, a behavioural profiling tool. But the debate today, we're really excited to welcome 4 panelists. The first of which you can see on screen now, and I'll introduce you in a second, to Ian Gourlay. So Ian has 2 decades of invaluable experience in leadership and change management consultancy, having founded both Active 4 and Initiate, 2 specialised consultancies renowned for their transformative work across a host of different sectors: recruitment, care homes, shipbuilding, financial services, a real eclectic bunch from that perspective. Ian is armed with an MBA and certifications as a chartered insurer, as well as a certified LIFO practitioner. Ian's passion lies in unlocking the unique potential of individuals within client organisations and driving them towards shared goals and endeavours. So without any further delay, delighted to welcome Ian on screen.
Hello, everyone. Thanks very much. That's very kind of you. Nice to see you, or at least hear you all, hopefully in a wee while. Yeah, 3 minutes. That's what I've got. I'll try not to waste them either and make them boring for you. I'm going to tell you a couple of brief stories, very brief ones. 15 years ago, virtual connections came alive to me when I had a client in Australia and I'm in Scotland, which is where I am just now. It involved me in going 5 times in 1 year to Australia and having loads of Skype calls, video calls on Skype 15 years ago, believe it or not, in between these visits to Australia. So it really brought virtual connections alive to me from a long time back. And it all worked. For the last 2 years, if we come up to the present, me and my colleagues at Active4, we've been working with Indeed, the global recruitment firm. Senior people from all around the world in that company, from Tokyo to San Francisco, London, and places in between. And they never meet in person with us. We've only ever done our work with them on Zoom or electronic communication, all virtual. And I thought I'd just give you a little bit of a quote from some feedback we received from them, because it's pertinent to all of this. Let me quote, I'll just read something out. The Active4 team consists of really humble but passionate people who take a serious interest in our success. Their impact has been compounded because our teams have noted the improved working relationships among us, and they are also working much more closely together as a result. Now, that's nice feedback for us to hear. All of that's happening through virtual connections, and it's really quite mind-blowing compared to, say, pre-pandemic, that you can get that. So the learning for me is that while, yes, it's great to be there, and I love being physically in the presence of my clients, thank goodness for virtual tools. How on earth then do we make these connections, and how do we make them work? And my reflection on this from this kind of thing, especially over the last 15 years since the Australia thing, is that it's quite enduring. These are as old as the hills, but they are still relevant today. 4 things, I think. Build trust, foster shared purpose, make sure you're competent, and be committed. Let me repeat that. Build trust, foster shared purpose, competence really matters, and be committed. But of all those 4, trust is the absolute key in my view. When it comes to technology, well, there's loads of tools out there, but I just look at them as that. They're just tools. Think about it this way if you're a consultant. How do you make your connection feel like it's at your client's convenience and not yours? How do you make your connection feel that it's at their convenience and not yours? So, for example, do you know whether they use Google or Microsoft? Do you know whether they find it intrusive to be WhatsApped, or do you know if they like to use a voicemail? Have you really connected with them as humans? In short, just think about this as if you're a connection who calls him or herself a consultant. Why should anyone trust in you? Remember the human aspect. And really, that's all I would like to say at this stage. So thank you very much, and over to my colleagues.
Thanks very much, Ian. So some interesting words and thoughts and to enter the debate with from Ian, and thanks for that contribution. So I'm going to introduce our next speaker now. Our next speaker, Patricia, and I go back in business quite a long time. She's a seasoned business strategist, which sounds, why should we call you seasoned? Experienced strategist and communication expert, with a rich background in sales management with industry giants like P&G, Coca-Cola. She spent 18 years empowering organizations to thrive, honing in on sales, communication, and leadership development. And her bespoke coaching programs have propelled countless individual and businesses to success. But it's way beyond the boardroom. As a champion for gender balance, she's authored She Said, a groundbreaking handbook empowering women to break through barriers and be heard in the workplace. And from coaching senior leaders to curating TEDx events, Patricia's passion for communication and public speaking knows no bounds. So welcome, Patricia. Looking forward to hear what you've got to say. Great to see you again.
You too, Mark. Thank you very much. Yeah, so when Mark said seasoned, I said essentially he means old, but we'll let that pass. Yeah, I find this topic absolutely fascinating. I guess in 2019, was it 2019, 2020, we all went home for what we thought was a few weeks. And there we stayed, and there many of us still are. So this whole virtual world, interestingly, as Ian's already pointed out, it existed. We just weren't using it. Interesting question, why we weren't using it. But suddenly we were forced to. We had to. And at first, everybody muddled through and made the best of it. And it was kind of okay. We were online and we were just doing our best and it was fine. But I think we've now reached a stage where the expectation that it's amateur night and that's okay has gone. So now we really need to be thinking and being much more considered and intentional about how we make this online environment really work. And I see lots of clients, groping with this. There's all sorts of experiments where people are requiring people to be in the office or enabling them to be out of the office on certain days or all days. So yeah, it's the sand is still shifting, and there's still a lot to be done. So I think this is a very timely debate for us to be thinking about how do we make this work? Because here's the thing. Human beings have not changed. Our working patterns have. The world around us has. Our basic neuroscience has not changed for the last 50,000 years or so. And so some of what drives us as human beings, some of the way our brains work, some of the ways we want and need to connect with other people, still exactly the same. How do we make that work in this environment? My personal belief is there's not been nearly enough thought and intentional activity and training and just careful consideration of how we make this work online. So I see, again, what you notice is people in all-day Zoom meeting, all-day Teams meetings, and it's very purposeful. It's like, right, we're going to go through the agenda, boom, 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 click, next meeting, click, next meeting. We seem to have lost a lot of our humanity. Hello, how are you? How are you doing? How's your day going? What's on your mind? So I think, I hope out of some of this debate, we will come up with some interesting ideas around, how do we keep that humanity in there? Because I think we've lost sight of it. We've not given that whole thing enough thought. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into some of these questions and others from the audience. But that for me is the big thing. Our human needs remain the same. How do we do them and satisfy them well to create connection in this online world? It's $1 million question.
Certainly is. Thanks, Patricia. Some really interesting insights there around neuroscience and how the brain works and everything else. And I know I put this in some of the dialogue that we had around the event before it came up, but it reminded me really strongly of and if you haven't read the book, it's worth it. Professor Matthew Lieberman, who's a neuroscientist and quite a famous one, wrote a book which, if you haven't read it. It's called Social. And the subtitle to it is "We Are Wired to Connect." And we just seem to be losing this connection. And that humanity, I think, was a great point to make. So looking forward to debating that. But I'm really delighted to be able to introduce our next panelist. So I'm going to introduce you to Martin Peterson. Now, Martin's worked for over a decade with an organization called Success Factory, driving success for clients across diverse industries through tailored team development programs. Martin has been a life orientations practitioner for the last 10 years or so, and it has been at the forefront of innovation, leveraging behavioral profiling in novel ways to revolutionize meeting effectiveness. I wouldn't be right if I didn't give his book a little plug there. So a recently published book, which is a great read, some real insights, some great tips and techniques. So no more boardrooms, how to actually connect with more effective meetings and everything else that goes with that. Also a string to his bow, he is a Lego serious play practitioner. and is pioneering inclusive strategies for business development, making every voice heard and every perspective valued. So really welcome to Martin. Known him for quite a bit of time, and really looking forward to your input, Martin. Welcome.
Thank you, Mark. The check's in the post. Good afternoon,
or the book, or the
everyone. Initially, when I was invited to look into this topic and join this session this afternoon, I initially revisited the meaning of the word virtual. The dictionary says almost or nearly as described. And it has got me thinking and wondering, are we almost or nearly making human connections in the way that we interact online? But I'll leave that one there for you to think about for a moment. I often like to challenge the question, as my opening interpretation of the word virtual suggested there. And I wonder if we're clear about what we mean by a virtual world. Are we talking about global remote teams who have probably been using technology for many years to be successful? Or are we actually talking about more traditional teams who are face-to-face, spend a lot of time together, or matrix teams in the same country or the same area? And they've been forced to change a little since the global pandemic that my colleagues already mentioned this afternoon. Assuming we're talking and we're talking about both, wider teams and localized teams, there's lots of considerations in my mind. So my first point on the topic would be to ensure that we consider that everyone is very different. And when we are considering how we interact, we need to consider what's important to them and what they value, and to how much human connection they need in order to thrive. I often see examples of leaders having only one tool in their toolkit. And unfortunately, that's still, even in 2024, is the hammer. Leaders still use the hammer as their only tool. However, I believe they need to consider that each person has a unique approach, and they need to find the right way to get the best out of them. And classically, we need to stop and think, how can we treat people the way they want to be treated? My second point really here will be to consider the context in which they operate. I really want to think about, are these teams who can operate remotely to achieve their results, or do they need to interact more? Where are they? And what principles are important to them in the delivery of their outcomes? And if we've answered both of these things, and we've considered both of these points, we can then start to think about the best way in which we create our human connection. During the pandemic, I really was working for most of it. And I was able to deliver training and facilitation to over 2,000 people across different organizations. Some events and online activities brought me closer to people and brought me great relationships and friendships that are now across the world. And they're continuing and creating great opportunities for me. We tried and failed many approaches and used different technologies, attempting to make what we did online match what we used to do face-to-face. And I found some of these things work and some of them don't. But just to finish my kind of opening pitch here, I've recently heard quotes from my clients saying things like, I've learned things today that I didn't know about this project, and we've been working on it for 15 months. I've heard people say we wouldn't have got that deep into the debate if we had been remote. And more recently, very recently, I heard someone say, if we hadn't have been together last week, we wouldn't have had the conversation with John, who has now agreed to book himself in to see a counsellor. And actually, I truly believe that that conversation may have been a lifesaver. So there's many things to consider here, but how we connect, how we understand the context, and how we bring people together, I think, has so many unanswered questions in. I'm not sure if that answers the question, Mark, but I think it's maybe a good starting point in my opinion.
It certainly did, and some real interesting insights and a different perspective on things. This need for us to get back into the room and the impact and effect that has, I think we all agree is powerful. I have to say, I think from my point of view, though, I get all that face to face, and I understand that we get that better connection when we do that, but we've got to get better at virtual. We you know, going back to Patricia's point, we're just not good at it. Yeah, we've taken the humanity out there, and that's a saying I'm gonna pinch and use. Thank you, Patricia. So yeah, I think it's really great point. So thank for your starting input, Martin. I'm sure you've got more to say. I'd like to introduce my last panelist, if I can, last but certainly not least. So I'm going to introduce Lynn Paxman to you. So Lynn is a professional with over 25 years experience dedicated to fostering outstanding organization culture and empowering teams to reach their full potential. She believes in the power of exploration and discussion to drive meaningful change. Lynn's current focus lies in the dynamic field of group dentistry, where she helps navigate the complexities of continuous integration and acquisition. And as a non-executive director, she brings a wealth of strategic insight to the table, coupled with a unique background. And I wouldn't be right if I didn't finish off with the fact that she's famed for being a snail farmer.
Yep, absolutely.
So welcome, Lynn, and over to you. Welcome to the debate.
Thanks, Mark. It was a fantastic introduction, thank you. And I think one of the best introductions that I've had. But do you know what people remember me for? It's the snail farming. And that's the thing that I always end up, you know, having a conversation about. So anyway, we'll move on from that today. So yeah, really interesting hearing what others have to say, and just picking up on what you were saying there, Mark, about we have to get better at virtual. And actually, what I sort of chose to talk about is getting better at the face-to-face. So I thought, oh, that's interesting. I've kind of gone the opposite way almost, because I think what I'm hearing is that people do feel that something's missing, and it's like the glue that holds teams together has disintegrated. And I'm talking about hybrid working. So what they sort of focus upon is the need to improve communication, to increase that human connection. And what ends up happening is that we increase the number of emails, newsletters, meetings. You know, we get online more maybe in a bid to keep everybody informed. It's like people feel out of the loop because they're not connecting in the same way. But from what I've observed, that doesn't create and generate involvement. And I think it's involvement which encourages that human connection. So how we enable people to feel part of something, to feel that sense of belonging, to feel that sense of attention and that they're understood and all that sort of thing. And I think that is what is missing. So because, you know, when people get face to face, they tend to chew things over, don't they, informally, and we do that when we're having a cup of coffee or on the stairs as you're going home at night or over the desk, and that can't happen if we're not in the office. So I guess my question is, how do we create that part of it? Because I think that's what creates the trust. And I think it's about, when we do get together, designing the conditions for thinking, learning and creating together. Because what I tend to see is when people do get together, they fall into that traditional format of having an agenda and you know, working through the points. And we've all travelled here, so we need to make sure we get an outcome from this meeting, and that's actions usually. But what if the outcome is actually about what has been the value of us being involved today? What's been the value in us spending time together today? So I think there's a different perspective there. And to achieve that, we need leaders who become facilitators of human connection. So it's a whole new skill set, I believe, that leaders need. It's listening, coaching, facilitating. And then using things like, you know, a bit of a pitch for LIFO tool, and I've certainly used that to help with my connections. I'm currently coaching over 20 dental practice managers, and with some of them I've maybe met them once before, and these are people that have never been coached, so they're not sure how that relationship's going to work. And I use LIFO to build that trust and that understanding and that connection, and to involve them in the conversation initially. And then what we do with the dental group that I'm currently working in is we get together twice a year, and that's about involvement. It's about discussion and contribution. So I think that's where the key to human connection lies, is how we make the most of the time that we do have together face to face. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Lynn. Yeah, and some really interesting and quite diverse views coming out in terms of, you know, what we need to do in this virtual world. Bruce, I think you're going to pick up some of the questions now. And are you going to bring everybody back into all the panel into view, Mike?
Yep. Yes, thanks, Mark. And can I just add my thanks to the panelists? There's been some very good debate on LinkedIn with some of the posts that we've had. So yes, great stuff. Thank you very much. We've had a couple of questions in the chat column, and one that was the first one to appear, and I would like to pick it up because I think it's important. Lucy posted a question, and I don't know whether, Lucy, you'd like to come on and pose it yourself, but it's around the subject of conflict and I suppose conflict/challenge in a virtual world. Mike, I wonder whether Lucy would like, I'm sure she won't mind coming on and expanding a bit on her.
There
question.
we go. I've
There
got
we go.
Lucy.
Hi, Lucy.
If Lucy's there. There you go. Bring yourself on unmute there, Lucy. You can pose your question. Anything you want to elaborate on?
Oh, great. Thank you. Hello, everybody. I really enjoyed the talks today. Yes, as you were all talking, the connection was mentioned obviously a number of times. And it just struck me how there's a lot of thought and care towards the individual and making the employee, I guess, feel the sense of belonging, connection to their company. And I started thinking about the company I'm working in at the moment and how much we talk about well-being and caring of the individual. And there's not really enough talk about how do we get efficient, how do we solve problems and get innovative. And I think that in the virtual world, it's probably quite hard, and I'm happy to be challenged on this, but I think it's quite hard to have real, proper conflict. And I think that the part of the innovation process where you do have that conflict is where you have a lot of energy and you have different ideas, and then you can kind of come to the point of solving problems. So what does the panelists think about conflict in the virtual world? Have any of you enabled conflict to happen successfully? And if you have, I'd be interested to hear about it.
Great, Lucy.
Looks like Lynn, you're waving.
Lynn had a hand up.
I am. I don't know if I've got an answer for you, Lucy, but I completely get what you're talking about. I think, you know, this was kind of links into my point about when we're together, how do we create that? To me, I think the key is, if possible, when we are together, how we really utilise that time to evolve those relationships so that we can have those harder discussions. And I think online is even harder than on the phone for some reason. I think there's just something about being in that environment of being on the screen. I think I've had some of my more real and harder conversations on the phone, and I don't actually understand what the dynamic of that is. Maybe there's some neuroscience in that, Patricia, I'm not sure. But yeah, I just wanted to hop on and say, yeah, I agree, and I think it's a really essential part of team building. There's the Patrick Lencioni model, isn't there, which says, you know, you need to have healthy conflict. So how do we enable that to happen?
Okay. Anyone else want to?
Yeah, Patricia, do you want to make comment? You got your hand waving there.
Indeed.
Your virtual hand.
Yeah, my virtual hand
Your
as
virtual
opposed to
hand,
my
yeah.
real one. Yeah, no, I think in answer to Lynn's question, yeah, there is something about the online environment which is very sort of eye to eye. So they say that's why, you know, there's quite a bit of research around this as to why we get things like Zoom fatigue. That, you know, we feel much more tired after a series of meetings online than we would in person. And some of that is because it's almost the equivalent in the real world of sitting and staring at somebody, which we wouldn't normally do. Normally we put our eyes around everywhere else, and that's relaxing. So there is that sort of intensity of feeling that you've got a bit of eye-to-eye contact going on. There's a counter argument to this that actually says that for some people, certainly for some women and for the more introverted characters and people showing those kind of traits that I'm sure LIFO could tell us about. Actually being online is easier to have conflict because it's that much more structured. You get the digital hand raising, so you don't have to force your way into a debate, and that almost the effect of again, like almost like being in a car with people get angrier behind a windscreen of a car than they do in real life. People actually feel freer and more able to say what they think when they're in the comfort of their own home and they're on a screen, not physically in the same space as other people. So I think this comes back down to the point of that Mark was making earlier. We kind of need to get comfortable with how we do this, and I think a lot of that probably comes down to being willing and able to chair a debate properly that allows for, if not perhaps even encourages, conflict.
Okay, thank you very much. Good. Oh, Martin's got his hand up as well.
Yeah, I want to just build on both Patricia and Lynn's comments there, really, in answer to Lucy's question, but link it to Jackie's, if I may, because I think the process that we apply when we are trying to generate conflict or trying to get good decisions, should we say, going back to the Lencioni model, is really, really key. So some people would be really happy to have that strong debate and that strong conversation. Some people might be happy to have that after a period of reflection. So whether we are face-to-face or whether we're in an online setting, I think what is really important is we choose the right tools or the right processes based on the people. And that's, in some respects, how we allow people to have conflict, but also in relation to Jackie's question, how we allow everyone to be catered for. We find a process that allows people to think, to be creative, to depersonalize something. That's what. So, we talked during the pandemic or the end of it, Mark and Bruce, around the use of online tools, and the appropriate use of them will allow people to have these strong conversations, but also to depersonalize it so it doesn't feel as strong conflict.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. I think it's a really good point. I mean, I've got to agree with this. The fact that everybody's individual and everybody's different. Some people are more comfortable in a Zoom environment because it's a little less personal and everything else that goes with that. And it's a question that somebody mentioned. Jackie made the comment in the chat, and Jackie's one of our panelists for the leadership debate, which is happening in a couple of weeks' time. Jackie, are you happy to come off mute and pose your question yourself? We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, sure. Hi, hello everybody. Martin answered some of the question, absolutely, and Ian's made a comment as well about listening as individuals, but I just think it's quite interesting, with the virtual versus face-to-face world. As a facilitator, you can get so much more, I think, awareness of how people are feeling by being in the room. Whereas when you've got the large groups online, particularly, early careers and things who don't want to turn their cameras on, it can be really challenging to keep them engaged, I guess, and connect with them. So how do you, as a facilitator, really do that? Everybody says get good at virtual delivery, but I'm not sure that necessarily makes the full difference. So I'd just love to know any tips and tricks that people have for really engaging people in the moment, getting cameras on, getting people involved, that sort of thing, that I guess plays to their strengths, for want of a better word, really, if that's what we're talking about.
Totally. Yeah. Patricia, you had your hand up. And then we'll come to you, Ian, after that.
Yeah, that sounds like, it feels like a panel game with your hand going up. You've got to be fast on the buzzer. Now I think the keeping audience engaged is absolutely critical online. You're never going to connect with people if they're actually busy answering their emails. We're already dealing with audiences and participants in workshops and facilitation environments whose attention span's been steadily dropping over the recent years and made worse now by this environment. It's just so easy, isn't it? If you turn your camera off, your email pings, your phone pings, people are going to look at it. So again, I think this is where we've got to take a very different attitude to how we work. It's not the same as working with people online. And I think traditionally, for example, if you're going to do a speech, historically, you would have done your talk and then you would have done Q&A. That format simply does not work online. You have got to get audience engagement all the way through, and you've got to involve them. And again, particularly, I think Jackie mentioned the early careers, younger people, the Gen Zs, whatever they are. You have to get them involved. They're not prepared to sit and listen. So the thing is, though, that there are so many pieces of functionality built into Zoom, built into Teams, and all the other platforms that can enable you to do that. Voting technology, whiteboards. You can. How much do we as consultants love a good flip chart? You can still do that. You can still do that online. You can do it on a virtual whiteboard. You can do it on Miro. You can do it using a visualizer. You can still do some of these things. You can still get your people involved and engaged very actively. You just got to use different functionality. Now, one of the challenges of that, of course, is this whole thing about how do you do that while still maintaining your delivery. And some of what you have to do is think about a producer. You need somebody running the show, if you like, running the technology, so you can concentrate on holding the room. But I think, these are the new skills that we're having to learn.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Ian, let's bring you in there.
Thank you. Hi, Jackie. Thanks for your question. Nice to see you again or hear you. One of the big changes from doing so much online is that we don't spend a lot of time traveling to get to where the client is, and it doesn't all depend on that day when we happen to be there, and we hope that they're all there, tuned in and ready for us. And it means that you can have a lot of bite-sized chunks with some of the individuals. And I think there's an element of efficiency that comes from being able to have short Zoom calls or quick chats with 2 or 3 people who, for whatever reason, weren't quite so tuned in on the day or couldn't be there on the day. But it's now quite normal, isn't it, to have a catch-up session or a replacement session using virtual technology. Plus, of course, you just know some people are not suited to being in one big room with their peers. We were talking a little bit earlier on about how for some people it's actually easier to talk conflict without being in the room. So I really do think if you get to know the group of people you're working with individually, you can find quite a different series of activities can be on your menu, and you have to select the right one to suit each individual. And these new tools help us do that marvelously. And think of all the time we've gained by not spending the day getting there, when we could spend the day that we would have spent getting there doing 5 or 6 bite-sized chunks to suit the individuals. I've found that's very useful, especially with people working on the other side of the world, and I do a lot with them. So I think in a sense the virtual tools help us from that point of view, bite-sized chunks to suit the individuals.
Yeah, I think you're right. Ian, just come in. The bite-sized chunk thing, I think, is really important, because we do get the Zoom fatigue piece, where people are jumping from one to another. Although picking up on one of your other points, that travel time thing, I was on a webinar by a lady who's actually coming on one of our debates later on when we're talking about sales. And she was highlighting from a neuroscience point of view what valuable time that traveling was in terms of reflection, and how we're now just jumping from one activity to the next and having little time to reflect and think. And neuroscientists would tell you, as Bruce and I know, because we spent a bit of time looking at neuroscience during COVID, that those periods of reflection are critical. Neuroscientists talk about peaks and valleys of behavior. You can have lots of peaks of activity, but you need the valleys of reflection in order to take it all in and decide the right objectives and everything else. So as with all of these things, there's different sides to the debate, and it's a really interesting one to reflect on, actually. So anyone else want to contribute? Have we got any more questions? Yeah, Lynn. Over to you, Lynn.
Sorry, it took me a while to find my unmute. Yeah, just to sort of add to that, I think what I'm reflecting on, because we seem to be talking for a while about facilitation and learning or training and that sort of thing. And I think that if, you know, as facilitators, we really need to question whether we need to deliver something. So that's sort of one of the things that I'm looking at the moment. You know, what are we going to gain by being together? So is there a bit of something that can be learned? And then what I'm going to be experimenting with is what I call yes but sessions. So I'm going to do online learning or bite-sized podcast, bite-sized audio learning, because a lot of people learn when they're on a walk or in the car and that sort of thing. So it's finding these short periods of time to learn, to take information in, and then a small group session. As I say, it's a yes but session where people go, well, yeah, that's all right in theory, but in real life, you know, and then we can talk through and overcome some of those blocks and barriers. So then the online session becomes a discussion rather than an absorption of stuff. And I think that's when people switch off, when they're not contributing and they're listening. I often question, do I really need to be here for this? Or could I read some slides or a book? You know, why are we doing this way? So when we do come together, we do something together. We can consume in other ways.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Really good point. It reminded me actually as people were talking, and I've always wondered why people haven't picked up on it since. I remember going back a few years ago and using WebEx training. They had a specialist tool that you could use for training. And one of the things I loved as a facilitator is that up on screen next to all of the delegates' names, if they started using another application, it put a little red dot there next to the name. And we all know as facilitators how powerful it is to, when you see people who aren't engaged, to bring them into the room and to be able to do that. I had great fun with that, I must admit, and I really can't work out why other tools haven't used the functionality of that.
Good. Okay. I'm just thanks. I'm just looking to see if there are any other questions in the chat. There's one question that Mark and I discuss a lot, and it's becoming more and more relevant. There's quite a lot of noise and chatter in the press and social media about managers and organizations wanting the workforce to return to the office, to be more present than they are at the moment. And I see a bit of a challenge here, because I think there's a bit of a conflict between a workforce who has experienced that release from the travel to the office, possibly unnecessarily as they see it, and a younger workforce, increasingly younger workforce who possibly gained their degree at university virtually, who haven't had that experience of travel and commuting and so on. And I think there's a challenge, and I was speaking to a couple of consultants who feel very strongly that that's the direction of travel, that there's going to be a push towards people going back to the office. And I just wondered if anybody has any views on that. It's not a conflict, but it's certainly a tension between employers who do have at the back of their mind, they quite like to see people back in the office more, and the workforce is saying, no, we've already proved we can be quite productive elsewhere. Oh, good. 2 hands went up. Martin, I think your hand went up first.
Thanks, Bruce. Yeah.
You beat into the buzzer.
I have really mixed opinions on this. And that's because I work with a really wide range of clients, from those maybe in a construction industry where it's not really optional for them to have that flexibility, or those out on site have to go to work, but their support teams maybe can work more remotely and they still need to engage and collaborate. The key thing I've found, certainly in the last, I can probably go back 9 months now with 2 particular projects, is they got their teams together and they asked the questions, how are we going to work together? And it's prevention's better than cure. So you mentioned tensions within teams and things like that. If you get the team together and say, this is what we need to achieve, how are we going to do it? And you know, what's the cadence we're going to have? What tools do we need to use to collaborate? What whiteboards to share information? Who needs to be in the office when? and they really have the kind of deep dialogue that, probably some of the things that Lucy meant really within a question around conflict, understanding each other and the needs of the business as well. I've got teams now who I've worked with who have really found a great way of working together. And when they do come together remotely or face to face, they have those human interactions where they ask people what they've been up to at the weekend and what they're going to be spending the rest of the week on. But they've agreed that as their way of working based on their own personal approach.
Yeah, good point.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much.
Ian was next, I think.
Oh, was he? Oh, sorry, Lynn.
On you go, Lynn. You are next. I was after you.
Me next.
Yeah, go on then, Lynn.
You were ahead of me.
So, yeah, what I think, Martin, what we were talking about there, that's what I was alluding to in my introduction. It's how we develop those ways of working and those skills so that when we do get together, it's really valuable time. And just picking up on this debate about, people wanting people back in the office, I feel like it's a knee-jerk reaction personally, because it's not really answering the question, why? Why do we want that to happen? And it's probably the answer, well, productivity, creativity, leadership, getting together, be able to building that rapport, etc. So, and what I've seen is that when management teams are not getting together regularly, there is that lack of consistent leadership of the management team pulling together and then taking the team in a consistent direction. So the team starts to lose direction, and that's where it starts to fall apart. So I think actually it is about how we lead in these situations, and that's take that step further back. That's about strategic alignment. Are we really clear on where we're going together and how we're all part of that and how we're aligned? We're not working in silos and all that sort of thing. So we're trying to solve the problem. We're trying to solve the wrong problem. Yeah.
Yeah, good point. Ian, you took your hand down, but you still want to...
Quite simply, really, I think things have changed. They've changed differently for different people. But what an opportunity that is for those of us involved in consulting. There's a leadership imperative that we can help with. There's a change happening all the time that we can definitely help with. There's technology consulting so that people can use it wisely. I'm no good with helping them with that, but some of you are. And then what about all of this stuff around alignment that Lynn was just talking about? What a marvelous opportunity all that change is for consultants like those of us on this webinar to get stuck in and do our best to help our clients. It's an opportunity.
Yeah, good point. Good point. I wanted to got a really good point raised by Tim Roberts to the panelists, made some comment there. Mike, can you bring Tim in if you're happy to talk, Tim, and just make your point directly?
I'll try.
Thank you very much.
It's around kind of like that previous point, which is, I work in the public sector and we have that tranche of people who are graduating from university, possibly done that all done it online during COVID. And actually their onboarding as employees has been done virtually. And the processes that they learn them as processes and nothing else. And when that's translated into practice, kind of like we have a workforce that is markedly different to the kind of workforce that we were onboarding previously, because it was a combination of, online learning, face-to-face learning, but also that handing down of skill set from experienced employees to newbies. And I think that for certainly in my particular world it's had a huge impact kind of in terms of learning your craft, not just the job that you do, that you're paid to do, but your actual craft. And I think one of the things I was going to say before when listening to all of the conversation was that time is so precious. And because, even linking back to the point about conflict resolution, it's very difficult to do conflict resolution when you're doing it online, because actually you need time to do these things and people are bouncing from meeting to meeting. So there's been lots of thoughts stimulated for me. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, really good point. Patricia.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Patricia's got a hand up.
Yeah, no, I think it go back to a question I posed in my introductory remarks about we had the technology to work much more remotely before the pandemic. Why didn't we? And I think one of the answers to that is poor management. A lot of management managed by bums on seats, by being able to see people being present in offices. That was much easier to manage than actually having to manage outcomes and manage people remotely. And I think this is one of this. I know you've got another session on leadership coming up where you'll perhaps talk a lot about this, but I think people have to have a real paradigm shift in what it takes to manage. And some of the other things that we've touched on, like in the old days, people used to say, "Oh, I get nothing done when I go into the office." Meaning they didn't sit at their computer pounding away emails and so forth. What they missed completely, of course, was all those brilliant, creative, serendipitous conversations that you had at the water cooler, at the coffee thing, whatever. Those were not valued. Like your point, Mark, also about time for reflection in between walking from one meeting or one building to the next. These are the things that when we're looking at the new normal, when we bring people in, we need time for reflection, for serendipity, for chewing the fat, for different things than probably our sort of, industrialized cog in the machine type thinking that we've had before. So I think there's just a real need for a paradigm shift. Yes, come back into the office, but don't do the same old things you were doing. Come back into the office and use that time better.
Really true. Yeah. Lynn, time's racing away, so we got some final comments. Yeah,
it's a point. So it's picking up on Tim's point, and I think that there has become an over reliance on online learning, which has become a tick box exercise. It's become about process and have you consumed that information. My daughter was working at McDonald's, and all their training was online, and she found it so boring. And my question is, how are you applying that in real life? And that is what Tim's saying. People don't know how to apply it. They consume it, but no one helps them to transfer that learning.
Yeah, really good point.
That's my last box point.
Yeah. Any final points, Ian, Martin, anything you want to add? No, we're all good. So, I mean, real thanks to everybody, in particular, for linking to the leadership debate, which Mike has got there. It felt like it was even planned, but it wasn't. But yes, we do have a session booked in a couple of weeks' time on the 29th of February, and it does exist this year. The next webinar on leadership, because I think it's critical. Have our leaders of today got the skills and the abilities and the know-it-all to be able to operate in this hybrid world, or do they need new skills to be able to do it? How are they going to keep culture at the heart of there? I remember somebody saying one sort of comment to me, which was, if everybody's definition of culture is what we do around here, how's that working when there isn't a here? When you're not together? It's a really interesting debate. So I think there's massive challenges for leadership going forward. And I'm delighted to say we've got Jackie coming back, who you've heard from earlier, Chris Batty, and a couple of others who are going to be part of that debate to bring that subject alive. And I'm sure we'll get such great debate. So there is a recording available on our Applied Strengths YouTube channel. So we'll give you a link to that. And what else we got, Mike? Or is that the last slide? Oh, yes. So in particular, thanks to our sponsors. Hanny's here. Haven't heard from you vocally today, Hanny, but great for you to be here. Thanks to our sponsors for sponsoring the event and for organising it. And we really would like to see all of you, as many of you can, to join the next debate. We'll be active on LinkedIn, advertising it, giving you the time, simple registration process, as I hope you found it this time, and really looking forward to seeing you again in the series of debate and hearing your views.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I'd just like to add my thanks to Mark's. Thanks for coming today and for stimulating a very, very interesting debate, and thank you to our speakers.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you're welcome. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Good.
Cool. Take care.
Thanks
Thank
all.
you very much. So we'll close up now and look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks' time.
Thank
Thanks
you.
everyone for coming.
Thank you.